Policies.
Okay.
Today is February 27th. I'm here at the Highlands Ranch Water headquarters in Highlands Ranch with Rick McLoud at this point. We are going to conduct this oral history with you today, Rick. Welcome
Thank you.
at this point.
Pleasure to do this.
Good. I understand that you have worked here for many, many years in your career, and we'd like to explore a little bit about your role and how the community of Highlands Ranch developed with its water supplies, in particular, your background. Just a little bit about your education first.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about your education and how ultimately after your education you came to be working on this particular project.
Sure. So I grew up in Denver, native of Denver. Went to George Washington High School, and then I went to the University of Colorado upon graduation from George Washington, and up in Boulder, and went to pursue a degree in civil engineering. And spent 4 years there. This was during the Vietnam War, and I had a 2F deferment, but I had a low draft number, so I knew I was going to need to go into the military when the Vietnam War didn't end. So after that, I was in the Army for 3 years, and instead of needing to go to Vietnam, I was lucky enough to get an assignment in South Korea. I was over there for a long period of time. Then I came back. I was on the West Coast and in the California area, actually near Oakland, and got a job with the Environmental Protection Agency in San Francisco. I was there for 4 years in their water division. That's where I was having my whole career get more focused in water at that point in time. And then eventually, my dad had a local company in Denver, and I got talked into coming back and joining him in his company. I was there for 4 years.
What did this
That was
company do?
he was electronic manufacturer's representative. And so he was like a traveling salesman selling a whole bunch of electronic products. And that was somewhat different than what was really my natural interest in the rest of it, my engineering background. And so after a while, I realized I wanted to move on. And that's when I was first looking for any job, and saw a job in the Denver Post. And it was this job to come down and work for the Jack G. Robb Company.
This is 1981.
This is 1981.
Wow.
Yeah. And I knew basically nothing of what was going on with the Jack G. Robb Company or who they were or whatever, but I knew it was a civil engineering consulting firm. And the person who was hiring, his name was John Hendrick. So I went and interviewed with John Hendrick, and he had had a person working with him for about 3 years, but that person had just now left, and he was looking to replace him. And so that's when I first started the Jack G. Robb Company, and their singular project was the Highlands Ranch community.
What did you know about the Highlands Ranch project potential?
You know,
before
basically,
you interviewed?
You know, I grew up in the Capitol Hill area of Colorado, and we almost never came as far south as where Highlands Ranch is. It was like a whole new area to me, but I knew it was possible to be down, something going on down there. So it was really a pretty new concept and idea, but it was very attractive as far as the kind of water resource engineering work that was being done, that it was being done to develop the surface water supply. In the Environmental Protection Agency, I was working a lot in wastewater and giving out grants for wastewater treatment plants. So I had some expertise there, and in the Highlands Ranch project, they were determining their discharge permit, and they wanted persons who had some background in dealing with federal agencies. And that's, of course, where the EPA background came in. And so that was among the first work that I did was on securing the discharge permit for the entire Highlands Ranch project, which you never knew just what you could get or what would be the quantity that they would allow you to discharge and the rest of it. So that was actually very critical to having the project go forward, to have that part. And actually, they wanted to dispute what was the classifications on the stream, and it was sort of driven by whether there was trout in the South Platte River a certain distance below Chatfield Reservoir. So among my first work there was to go down along the South Platte River and see if you could see reds, which are nests that trout will create when they're reproducing. And if there were, then we probably didn't have an argument to change the classification. But if we couldn't find any reds, then you would have a problem. So I was down there with a fisheries biologist, and sure enough, we found reds and we found rainbow trout and stuff, and brown trout actually, mainly in the South Platte River. So that was among my first examples of the work that I was doing there.
So when you started in '81, Mission Viejo had purchased the Highlands Ranch, if you
Yes.
will, from Marvin Davis, and started developing the development plan, probably in 1979. You came in 1981. What was the status of the plan relative to providing all the water resources that the community, which is anticipated to be 100,000 people over many years or
Right.
whatever? What was the status of the water situation when you came on board?
Well, and so we knew then that we were a master plan community. We knew we were planning for the entire project for its entire life. There would be some point when we were built out. So we knew that we were able to estimate through the calculations that we would do what is the total amount of water that we need to be getting, for instance, or how much wastewater we would generate, or those kinds of things. And that was actually quite an advantage. And among my first work that I was doing was to refine those projections and make sure we were being as accurate as possible based upon whatever had been the historic record of people using water or generating wastewater and that kind of thing. But the project had been planned and worked on, and there was numerous reports written by then by a sophisticated group of people from the Mission Viejo background. They'd done work in California, come into Colorado, and so I was there where initially I was reading all kinds of reports and seeing the vision of these professional engineers and lawyers of what they thought was the best way to develop a reliable water supply at Highlands Ranch. And so that was actually very helpful, and also we were very active because there had been a groundwater law passed in 1973 allowing the landowner through their ownership of the land to have access to the deep Denver Basin groundwater underneath, and that would be a reliable water supply that you could get this project going with. And so they were already going to water court and developing a number of the groundwater supplies, and they were drilling wells even. Some of the first wells were drilled in 1979, 1980. And so right away, it was jumping into what is the surface water we could be having and what is the groundwater we could be having to immediately have a project. And also, before I came in 1981, they successfully negotiated a contract with the city of Inglewood to be buying from Inglewood the excess water that Inglewood was willing to sell, and also use of Inglewood's facilities, which included storage space and McClellan Reservoir. And so that gave this project the opportunity to have a combination of both surface water and groundwater right from its very beginning.
Did you have
That was really critical.
Did you have access to Englewood treated water?
No. Because Inglewood is actually somewhat of a distance further to the north, and then they were putting their water into what they call the Bi-Cities treatment plant, their water and Littleton's water. Then that was discharged into the South Platte River north of us and flowing downstream. So no, we didn't have any real access to that. But we did have the ability from whatever water we would buy from Inglewood, and they had very senior water rights, which were extremely valuable to us, to take that water and put it through our own wastewater treatment plant, and through our own water rights, be able to recapture that water and reuse it further to extend what was going on.
My understanding is the first homeowners built home. Mission Viejo was the primary home builder in addition to the community developer in the summer of 1981. When permits for those first homes got built at this point, how did you provide water to them?
Well, so that these studies that had been done were both looking at what would be the facilities for the entire project, but then they also would have phases built into them, showing what is it that we need to build right away to be able to have the first homes come into Highlands Ranch. And so that was right near where Broadway comes into the Highlands Ranch area, that those homes were being built. And for instance, Forrest Dykstra bought one of those homes.
That was in Northridge.
Yeah, in Northridge, that was where that was happening. And so these plans were not only trying to foresee the entire needs, but they also were having plans of exactly how to put in the first pipelines and pump stations and whatever it would take. And also, like the first wastewater treatment plant was at 0.5 MGD, where the eventual plant became 8.5 MGD. The first water treatment plant was at 3 MGD, 3 million gallons per day, where the eventual treatment plant would be 40. So all of these facilities and everything were on a phasing where you sort of build right away what you need to get us going, and then later development would occur to fill out the whole system.
Where was the first water
And let me just
treatment
mention one thing, is that the groundwater, it was recognized in the development of the law that it was a non-renewable resource. It was a resource that you would have for a while, but later on, eventually, it wasn't being replenished by the rain or the streams or anything like that. So you would just have it for a while. So the groundwater gave us the opportunity to have some movement on the development and buying us some time while we could then develop the surface water supplies, which are a part of the hydrologic cycle and renewable. So right from the beginning, we were always looking at that, and that's where the agreement with Inglewood was very advantageous to us, because that got us into having some surface water right from the beginning, where we could always minimize the use of groundwater, use as little as possible because it wasn't being renewed. Keep it in reserve and emphasize the surface water first. But then if the surface water wasn't there, have the safety net of being able to call upon the groundwater. So that's been this philosophy of our water supply development through our period, and that's the great challenge that other entities in Douglas County have, is to develop the surface water as best they can to complement the groundwater that they're now using. It was very lucky and advantageous that we would find a neighbor who just happened, through their foresight of their forefathers, have this really sterling, high quality amount of water, a very high priority, that they were willing to sell to us. So we became their captive buyer of that water, they became our captive seller, and we still have that relationship today.
Where was the first treatment plant?
So the first water treatment plant is where the water treatment plant still is today, and that decision was driven because we had access to McClellan Reservoir. So you wanted to first get the water out of McClellan and have as short a distance as you could to get that treatment, get to the treatment plant. So this is just a little bit to the south of where McClellan Reservoir is. And this is a treatment plant that then any water's coming down the South Platte River, water that gets to Chatfield Reservoir or whatever, you just have to have these systems developed that can move that water to get either to the storage or directly from the stream and get to our water treatment plant.
And then from the treatment plant, initially they had pipelines going to Northridge.
That's right.
For the
Which
first
is a
time.
relatively close distance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because that was the first development.
So one of the other advantages of this project is that we're relatively close to the South Platte River. So to get the water off of the South Platte River and into our system, you don't have to have real long lengths of pipeline or pump stations or whatever. You can get it off right away. So that was the plan all along. I should mention that the first thing we did was go to Denver Water and see if they would treat it, they would provide service to us. But by that time, Denver had a change in their philosophy. A thing called the Poundstone Amendment had gone through the state legislature. Rita Poundstone, yeah. And that changed dramatically what Denver was doing. Generally, before, they were gradually providing service to all kinds of growing entities in the metro area.
Even if they weren't contiguous.
Yeah, but the Poundstone Amendment changed that, and they lost some control and couldn't annex areas in like they would. And so they had a change of their philosophy, and they drew a big line. They would only provide water within this circle that they created, and Highlands Ranch was outside of it. So our going to them, their answer was no, that we couldn't provide the service to us from them. But otherwise we would have, I'm sure, because that would have been the easiest path to move forward. So right away we knew we were on our own to develop this, and very late in the game as far as getting senior water rights or whatever off of the stream, and having therefore the reliable water supply that you need in the dry periods, which is really what drives water supply planning.
So we're
Okay.
a community today that's treating water supplies.
I'm sorry?
We're treating we're treating water supplies for 100,000 people today.
Yes,
At this point, we started with 0.
right.
At this point, what were the major steps to get the capacity increased? Obviously, you started small at this point,
Right.
and had a
So
number of steps increasing capacity. I'm sure multiple times
Right.
over the years
So
as
we're
the
a-
community grew.
We're a conjunctive use system, meaning we use groundwater and surface water. Other entities have not developed that way. They've only used surface water, and to this day, Denver and Aurora and others only use surface water. So from the very beginning, we needed to develop entire systems to take, and we'd be able to use the surface water and the groundwater. And we were doing that simultaneously. We had the beginnings of that. So you have whole pipeline systems bringing the water from the wells or from the surface water to your system. You have different treatment systems. We have a surface water treatment plant. We have 2 groundwater treatment plants. And so that's what we had to do, was constantly develop these 2 systems and slowly grow them to the sizes that they needed to be, but so that you had, if you had a really dry year and you didn't have the surface water you needed, you had the groundwater as the fallback. And that's been our philosophy through our entire history, and it continues to be our philosophy today. But we always want to minimize the groundwater that you're using because it's not renewable. So what we did was slowly develop more and more surface water. And to do that, you also develop raw water storage. So we had the McLoud storage, but eventually we developed our own additional storage called the South Platte Reservoir, which was a gravel pit. That's again on the South Platte River, but just on the west side of it. But that was an advantageous location there, and so we've now developed that as storage. And then we wanted to develop additional storage, and the logical place to do that was in Chatfield Reservoir. And Chatfield is a flood control reservoir designed to mainly stay empty. But we were asking the Corps of Engineers to allow a little bit more water on the bottom of it for use of municipal water supplies in addition, but still have it empty enough to capture any big future floods so that there wouldn't be a recurrence of the 1965 tragedy and disaster that there was. So that working on the Chatfield Reservoir project, and I worked it in my whole career, that took 25 years of meetings and working with other people. Initially there was 30 different entities. Eventually it got down to 10 different entities. We had multiple trips back to Washington, D.C. and other places, and all kinds of studies and the rest of it to meet all the federal laws that you have to meet to be able to take water out of a federal project. We triggered a federal action, is what it's called. And so that's what we've done, is slowly over time keep adding little pieces of additional water sources of different kinds, and then also storage of different kinds, and slowly build out our systems as far as its capacity, so that now with 100,000 people, we have a fully built out pipelines and treatment plants and all that kind of stuff, and also these water sources. And the work is not completely done, but right now we are at build out. We're close to 100% of where we anticipate being. So we know how to get the water now, but there's some dynamic over time that the groundwater, being non-renewable, and we've been using it, so we have to think about how long is that going to last, and what are we going to do as it diminishes gradually over time. And some of the water supplies we have are in water contracts, which instead of us completely owning that water, we're buying it from Inglewood, and some from Denver, and some from a couple of others. And we have to think about how long those contracts are, and what would happen if they change their mind and won't renew that contract or whatever. So there's still work to be done, and I'm going to be replaced by a different person who will be in charge of carrying through these things. But we right now have a quite reliable water supply of about 87% surface water, about 13% groundwater for this 100,000 people here at Highlands Ranch.
Additionally, when you had to drill wells for the groundwater, or even today, on average, how deep do you have to go in the different aquifers to find water?
So the aquifers are like a layer cake. There's 3 different layers that we can go down to. The top one is the Denver aquifer, the middle one is the Arapahoe, the lower one is the Laramie Fox Hill. You go down roughly about half a mile to 3/4 of a mile to as far as 1.5 miles down to get into these different aquifers. Any one well just goes to one of the aquifers. And you put a pump down at the very bottom of that aquifer so that you're able to pump as much as you can right from the very beginning. And we've drilled 51 of these wells into these different aquifers in doing that. Some of the wells in some of the locations by now have run out of water. And we've had already like 40 to 45 years of pumping these, and some of them have run out of water. And so we're just using the very best configuration, and the rules and the regulations allow you to put in some supplemental wells as well. But one of our problems is that our nearby neighbors also are using wells into these same aquifers, and we can't control what they're doing. So this competition for the groundwater, yes, it's a very advantageous source of water, one that doesn't evaporate, one that we control, it has pretty good quality, but it doesn't have this longevity that we're looking for, and also we're not controlling what's going on around us. So there's still a need to both develop some additional surface water and to hopefully reduce our demand, to use less water. And the times when we're using a lot of water is through the summer. A lot of that is for bluegrass lawns or other vegetation. So we're in a long-term transition of trying to minimize our use of water in those ways, and stretch out the supplies and have people conserve as much as possible, that sort of thing.
Very good at this point. Speaking of quality.
You got good questions, so keep
Thank
them
you.
coming. Yeah.
Speaking of quality, some people have remarked upon the hardness of different water
Yes.
sources within Highlands Ranch and either like it or don't like it at
Yes.
this point. Could you comment on the
Yes.
whole thing and how your district is dealing with this type of feedback?
Exactly. So I say we have 2 sources of water, surface water and groundwater. Well, they have a little different taste to them. And most of the time we're using surface water, so the taste is constant and people aren't noticing it. And also, the treatment process is a highly sophisticated process, satisfying the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements and whatever. And part of that is its taste and odor. But we're taking in this water out of reservoirs that have biological life in them, and that there can be some tasting influences from that. Even though it's safe, it can taste different ways. And then also, if we go to groundwater, that's mainly a chemical taste based from the depth of this water down in these sandstone formations and everything below it. So whenever we're like switching from one to the other, that suddenly will be a slightly different taste for people, and they will notice that difference necessarily. It's still safe the whole time, but it can be different in its taste. And then there's one contract that we have with a regional project that is reusing water that Denver and Aurora has in excess. This is called the WISE project. They're retreating that water, and that water is coming to us through the Aurora system. And so here you have these 3 different sources of water, each of them a little bit different in their taste, and coming into our system in varying amounts at varying time. So that's what's causing this sudden change like that. I personally am on the Denver water system, and that's a constant system. You're always getting surface water out of their treatment plant, so you almost never notice any change. So this is something that we always try to blend it and do it gradually and try to explain what's going on and make sure people know that everything about it is definitely safe for them, but yes, there can be minor changes in the taste of the water. So our best thing is to have people understand it as much as anything, and to minimize what we can do about it.
I'm in a home that does not have a water softener at the moment. Would you recommend, living in Highlands Ranch, that I acquire a water softener?
Well, that's kind of like a personal question. It's all about your own needs and everything. My whole life being on Denver's water was quite hard. It's coming out of the mountains where you have the calcium and stuff like that. And And I, for years, had tropical fish, and so you really are worried about the quality of the water there. So if the taste of it and the way that it feels in the shower and the residue that it's leaving or whatever is a nuisance to you, then yes, the softener is a way to minimize that and change the nature of the water, the chemicals of the water. But it isn't necessary, and it's just sort of an adjustment to it. So that's really a personal choice question that I leave it to you.
We're in a dry year right now. Some people believe that climate warming is affecting climate in the Rocky Mountain area that we're in.
This is an extreme year.
Yes.
They're setting new records for how low the snowpack would be at this time of the year or that kind of thing. It's a significant worry.
How do you believe that's affecting the Highlands Ranch Water, and what are you planning to do to deal with this?
Good question. So this is not only a year of drought, but this is the third year of drought. Our last wetter period was in 2023. 2024 and 2025, it was relatively dry, but we had water that we'd stored in our Chatfield storage space that we had plenty of water for our usage. Finally this year, our water supply in our reservoirs is getting down to a point where we're needing to trigger our drought response plan. That's a plan where we try to inform our customers about the bigger water supply situation, the limitations that we have, and we ask for their cooperation to reduce their usage of water. And we do that in various stages and with lots of sharing of information and everything out to people so that they understand this. And Denver and others are doing it at the same time. And we've just recently gone into our first stage of some sort of a difference of what we do called a drought response. And the next stage is stage 1. And we're going to remind people that we have regulations about only watering during the evening, not during the daytime hours and other things like that, and that we're asking people only to water 3 days a week, for instance. But what we know is that these conditions are of such an extreme that we don't know exactly how this is going to go. And we're not only worrying about this year, but we have to worry about next year and the year after that, because oftentimes these go in multi-year droughts. And so we don't want to pull out all of our water from storage or whatever. And so however this develops, maybe we'll get a big spring snowstorm and that'll really save us. And that would be great. But if we don't do that, then we're going to be going into these other stages where we ask people even more to cut back on what they're doing. The worst case of this is that people have to not water outdoors and let those plants die. We've never had to do that. We never want to have to do that. That's the extreme for everybody. We definitely have enough water for indoor use and for people's health and welfare. But the question is, do we have enough water to have the luxury of gardens outdoors and even bluegrass or whatever? And we hope to not do that. We don't want our metro district to have to lose its playing fields and the rest of it and all the rest of it. So that's a real extreme, but this is unfortunately an extreme period, and we can't really tell what's going to go on.
Those are very trying times.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll see.
We had that in 2002. This is a year similar to 2002, and we've done various things to try to have people know about this. People are quite responsive, and they really do cut back and do understand the need for this and how we're, the variability of our climate and everything. So they're very good about it, but we still may be seeing something it's the worst that we've ever seen.
Switching topics a bit.
Sure.
You've been here in one form or another, working for different subcontractors since 1981. You've seen a lot of water flow under.
So we're the utility, and usually consultants work for us. Yeah.
At this point, what people that you work with have been most significant to you, either in a colleague role or a mentor role?
Yeah. And
obviously, you mentioned John Hendricks earlier.
I worked for John for a number of years, and the other people that I would that come to mind are the water lawyers that I've worked with. I've worked with these spectacular, knowledgeable, wonderful people, and Chuck Woodruff is the person whose name I would mention, and then after him, Ronnie Sperling. And these are people who have helped us to acquire the water through working through the water courts and the rest of it, but then also to acquire various contracts for the water, and then to really understand how that whole system works. And I have a person now named Fritz Holloman that I work with, who's really a spectacular person. And then it's not only the water lawyers, but then we've also had water engineers who have helped us in this system. And right now there's a person, Doug Clements, who I've worked with for years, and before him, Craig Green. And so all of these people, you don't do it alone, but you need to do it as a team, and we always work collaborative on all of these things, but they've really helped us to really have the knowledge and to be able to make the correct kind of managerial decisions to have a reliable water supply. So there is very little water available. It is very challenging. Many entities are looking for it. For years we thought we'd just go to the West Slope. That's where 80% of the water is. And we thought, well, we'll just use Roberts Tunnel. That's Denver's tunnel, and we bring it from the West Slope. But for years, the people on the West Slope have very jealously protected their water and not allowed any water to come over. There's been 40 years of no project from West Slope to East Slope. There's right now, with the problems on the Colorado River, there's no prospect that any water will ever come from the West Slope to the East Slope. So where are all this growth in Colorado, and especially in the Front Range, going to get its water? And unfortunately, the answer is probably from the farming that's nearby. We've been able to develop our supplies and not really impact the farms, although we did have 2 ranches where a willing seller sold us their water up in South Park. That's added to what we have. But mainly, we've been able to do it by a combination of our own water rights, where we're maximizing the use of the water that's available in the South Platte River, and this arrangements first with Inglewood and then with Denver.
If I understand right, 90% of the water use in Colorado is for farming?
About 80%, but
80%.
That's 80, 85, 90 different numbers, and that's throughout the entire state. So that is the place where there is some water, but the farmers don't necessarily, they will sell it sometimes if their kids or something won't continue to farm or whatever, and that's gradually happening. But almost everywhere that's happening, it says significant adverse environmental effects to that community because of the way they're all tied together, everything like that. And where it's first been quite problematic is in the lower Arkansas Valley. And Aurora went in and bought a lot of that water and the rest of it. But even in the Colorado, yes, there's a lot of water still being sold from farms to communities. Aurora is buying a lot, and other entities. And this is just because we just don't have very much water. And we've developed almost all of the obvious storage places that there are. And if you want storage, you maybe have to go a greater distance away or something like that. So it's extremely challenging to develop reliable water supplies in Colorado. It always has been, but it's even getting ever more all the time. That's not even to mention climate change and some things like that are factors as well in this. So,
We're
yeah.
reaching the end of our time.
Okay.
You're retiring in May.
Yes.
What will you miss most about what you've done?
Well,
in
it's
your career
just
here?
been incredibly enjoyable. I've enjoyed every day working here. I enjoy the work that I do, but I enjoy the people that I work with as well. So that all of that is very hard to slip away from, and whatever. And it's really been to say that you've had a career where you've enjoyed the work every day, look forward to it. The challenges are constantly changing. All of the information is very interesting. There's a big part of history in any water development project and stuff like that. So I will miss that, but I'll transition into other groups that I'm meeting with or whatever I'm doing. So, but mainly I've done it maybe 10 years longer than I expected to do it, or something like that. So I know that it's time to pass it on to another person.
Okay, last
Thank
word before we wrap up goes to you.
Last word?
Last word.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to even like share some of the history of what I know, and I don't think I got to everything, but you know, and I welcome any opportunity to talk to other people about it or whatever. But
Well,
I
maybe we can get you
I
to
appreciate
present.
history, and I want to grab it. I had grandparents, you know, like worked in a one-room schoolroom, and you know, worked in Leadville in the mining towns and all this kind of stuff. And I was too young to realize I should be asking them all kinds of questions and putting it down. So I've known my whole life that history is too valuable, and we want to grab it and hold on to it and record it any way we can. So I look forward to this opportunity.
Okay, well, Rick, thank you on behalf of the
Thank you.
Highlands Ranch Historical Society for all of your comments, whatever insight into water development in a very challenging area, very challenging times.
Yeah.
So thank
So
you.
one of these groups I may join is the Historical Society. See?
We would encourage that. Perhaps you could make a presentation at some point in the future
You bet.
to the Historical Society meeting.
Thank
Love
you.
to have you do that.
Thank you for what you do, Mark.
Thank you.